Welcome, Jackie Fallmay here. And tonight I want to touch on something that is huge in really global culture this past few days. And that is what we call the Kendrick Lamar and Drake quote unquote beef. And I want to talk about some things that I'm confident that most people aren't talking about. And the reason why I say I'm confident that most people are not talking about it is because these are things we generally don't want to talk about. In fact, we avoid talking about this when it comes to hip hop. And I want you to kind of think about what are some of the things that you've heard so far. And I want you to hold those things in your mind as I move through what I have to say tonight because I want you to hold the tension between those two perspectives. And I want you to think about, when I talk about what I'm going to talk about, I want you to think about how those things have been held in tension with all of the things that we've said about hip hop over time, whether they be good, they be bad, what we wanted from hip hop, what hip hop had given us. And I want you to think about how that has culminated in this moment between Kendrick Lamar, Drake, society, culture, businesses, social media, and all the other aspects that an art form, a lifestyle, a culture like hip hop can impact. All right, we're gonna hop right into it. I won't delay any further. So I call this a fitting end because as I was talking to some of my friends and we were just talking about the entire complex conversation around this historic moment. It really is a historic moment economically, with Kendrick Lamar doing what he's done in terms of the number of streams over the last few days. We talk about culturally, just the impact that it has had, how it's divided people, how it's brought people together. We can talk about spiritually, because Kendrick Lamar, we know, has been very outspoken about his faith, about his Christian faith, about his wrestling with being a Christ follower. There are so many aspects of this, but I'm going to narrow down to about four, and we're going to look at some of the things that I believe and that I'm confident that most people aren't talking about, and you'll be able to expand the conversation that you have. We'll talk about, of course, we'll talk about failure and what failure looks like. And one of the big things that I want to talk about tonight specifically is clarity. So let's not delay any longer. So a fitting end, Kendrick Lamar, Drake, and things. So when we talk about this beef, and for those of you who aren't familiar with it right now, the hip hop star Kendrick Lamar, or rap star, artist, however you want to describe it, Pulitzer Prize winning author in terms of his lyricism. He's won a Pulitzer Prize for it. And we've got Drake, who's just sold everything. He's a mega millionaire. They both relatively are mega millionaires at this point. And they have done what has for a long time been called in hip hop, when you have these large scale wars of words, hopefully they remain words, these large scale wars of wars, they're in beef. And hip hop used to be of a situation to where when two artists beefed, it was just words and there wasn't a lot of money that was changing. There weren't these big conglomerates that were profiting and selling and moving and shaking around these words, around this conflict. And one of the reasons why I call this a fitting end is because when I was having this conversation with a couple of my guys about this, because I hadn't even paid attention to it at the beginning, one of the things that I said was, for me, that this represents a fitting end to what I believe is the hip hop era, ERA. You can call it an error if you want to get into that part of the conversation, but just a time frame. And what I meant by the ending of this time frame was, I don't know how many of you all are familiar, but I try to keep my thumb on AI. And one of my buddies sent me a new AI that you can type. It's sort of like Midjourney, where Midjourney creates images, but it creates audio. You can create hip hop beats. You can create classical music selections. You can create any kinds of songs simply by typing in the words and describing to the computer what type of song you want to create. This computer also goes on to, it's called Udio. The name of the AI app is called Udio. It also goes on to, if you tell it what kind of song you want, it will create the lyrics, whether it's a rap song and it creates the rap lyrics, or it's a ballad and it creates the lyrics to the ballad, the love song, whatever. So it creates not only the sound, not only the beat, not only the melody, not only the song, it creates the lyrics, the words, the poetry that's included, all by typing in words. And I've done this, and if you go look it up, you'll see this. And to me, this clash between Kendrick Lamar and Drake, the two biggest rap stars currently, signifies the end of an era where people were creating. Now, of course, if you know some of the cultural conversation around Drake, there's already conversation that he doesn't write his own lyrics. He openly used AI on one of his last songs. So we're closing out that era where people had to have any real caliber of lyricism in order to be respected, in order to and I guess Drake is the antithesis of that, in order to participate. And I think even Drake has a certain level of lyricism, or he wouldn't have been able to get to where he is, to where he could pay other people to write his rhymes for him. But we're moving out of that era where you had to have some level of skill, some level of talent, something special about you that was marketable in order to be able to generate revenue, in order to become a quote unquote star. So now we're moving out of that era into where you can literally type in what kind of song you want, what kind of track you want, who you want on it, what kind of words you want, and the computer can generate that literally in seconds. So when I look at the Drake and Kendrick Lamar beef, I look at it as the end of that era where you had to have some level of talent or skill or something special about you in order to create this product. And the way I look at it is, I'm always looking at things through the eyes of failure. What does it look like? How will people recover? How will people thrive in a space that we've reached the end of? And this space where we are in hip hop was, number one, predictable. We knew we were going to get here, or we should have known that we were going to get here. But it was also an inevitable failure. And I'll tell you why. And this is one of the pieces that we typically don't talk about when we talk about hip hop, because we never really want to touch it. We never really want to get down into the nitty gritty, into the dirty. I remember back in probably the 90s or the early 90s, there was this guy, this preacher, this minister, and his name was G. Craig Lewis. And he had created a ministry, and I guess he still has it. The way it felt was like he created a ministry around trying to destroy hip hop. And I guess maybe he would say that he was just alerting us. We were kids at the time, he was an adult, alerting us to some of the evils in hip hop. And he had taken this really spiritual lens, and he peeled back all the layers of hip hop, and he was talking about all of the demonic stuff that was in it, the demonic people. I remember he was going really hard against Bone Thugs and Harmony. He was talking about all of spiritualism and curses and demonic movements and witchcraft, etc., that exist in hip hop. And a lot of people brushed him off. I didn't. I still felt like he didn't have a clear understanding of what hip hop actually was, but I didn't brush him off. But if you're looking at it through his lens, where hip hop has ended up right now today, it was predictable, both predictable and inevitable, and it was a failure. But the way I look at it is this: it was predictable and inevitable failure, number one, primarily because it was looking for the wrong things. If you go back and you hear historians talk about the history of hip hop, it talks about where it was born in the urban areas, in the inner city of New York. You can get into whatever details you want, but that's not necessarily germane to what I'm talking about. But it's born out of poverty. It's born out of necessity. It's born out of a spirit of rebellion, of being in this place where we are rooted and anchored in poverty. We're held down, and we just want to celebrate. We just want to spread love. We just want to have joy. We just want to have a good time, get together, party, dance, break dance, spray graffiti, etc., and just have a community together. Now, the predictable and inevitable failure in that piece was that what people were looking for when hip hop started was what people have been looking for since Adam and Eve were removed from the garden, since God removed Adam and Eve from the garden when they committed the first sin against God. And that is, hip hop, like any other art form, like any other culture, was looking for goodness. It was looking for God. It was looking to be loved. It was looking for joy. It was looking for peace. It was looking for kindness. It was looking for fulfillment. It was looking for meaningfulness. And these young people that created hip hop were looking for that. But the problem with it is that when they started looking for it and they created this, what otherwise would be a beautiful art form, is that instead of seeking Christ and seeking God through it and using it to glorify God, what we ended up doing, and I say we because I became a part of the culture, what we ended up doing was we did the exact same thing that cultures had done before us, that artists had done before us, and it was take something that God wanted to make beautiful, and we sacrificed it to our own hedonism, to our own desires, to earthly wealth. We sacrificed it to sex and sexuality, to all of the things that made us feel good in our flesh for the moment, but always, predictably and inevitably, fail in the worst way. So again, for me, the Drake Kendrick Lamar beef is a bookend on the hip hop era at a time where it still had a certain level of clout, to where you could just come into the culture and have a certain level of clout. But now it ends in brokenness. Now watch what I mean by this. When I say it ends in brokenness, I want you to go back and listen to the lyricism of Kendrick Lamar and Drake as they threw these shots back and forth. You have pedophilia, you have domestic violence, you have gender, you have sexuality, you have all different kinds of violence, you have profanity, you have all of these things wrapped up in the culmination of the hip hop era. And it started out wanting to be something beautiful. Hip hop started out just wanting to be loved. When I talk about hip hop, I'm not talking about a certain person or a certain group of people or even the art form. I'm talking about the spirit of hip hop. And you'll hear people talk about the spirit of hip hop because it is a spirit. Now, we call it hip hop, but it could be any spirit that is an ungodly spirit. I mean, you can give it any kind of name that you want. Spirits don't die. So it's a spirit that has been here pretty much since forever. But it's coming to a predictable and inevitable failure. It breaks down because what we were looking for, what we have been looking for in hip hop was never really there. So it failed. And you know, I always talk about clarity. One of the things that we've never done in hip hop was have clarity. We've never sat down and talked about together about really what is hip hop. We use a lot of pleasantries and paint pictures of it's graffiti and it's breakdancing and it's MCing and it's DJing and it's a culture and it's an art form. But we never talked about how hip hop has failed in giving us what we always wanted. That was to be loved and to love like Christ. That was the desire. And it's not just hip hop, it's all around the world. You see people trade wealth for it. That's what people are looking for with wealth. Broken relationships. That's what we're looking for. So we've reached a predictable and inevitable failure. We've reached a fitting end. And why did it fail? Like what is the failure? What kind of failure are we talking about? And I've touched on it. But part of the failure is that there's none good but God. There's none good but God. And that's the tension. That's where we have this tension place. That's where we're pulling everything at the seams in terms of hip hop, in terms of the culture around hip hop, in terms of the business of hip hop, in terms of hip hop entrepreneurship. Anything related to that spirit of hip hop now has a tension that we're reaching the end of. And that tension, that pulling against itself, is the fact that there's none good but God. If you remember that part in the scripture, where I believe it was one of the Pharisees had replied to Jesus or said something to Jesus, or it was a passerby. He used this phrase, he said, good teacher. And Jesus stopped him and he said, why do you call me good? There's none good but God. And Jesus was making a distinction between worldliness, the flesh, the simple things that we desire in the world, and God. And what's happened with hip hop is that over time, We did not realize that there's none good but God. We wanted everything that God would give us: the money, the fame, the love. Uh, we wanted physical love, the eros desire, things that God has already created the right boundaries for, and given us the opportunities to receive. But we wanted it the way hip hop, that spirit of hip hop, would give it to us. And now we're realizing, and it didn't take long, because generally you realize really quickly, that there's none good but God. And you hear these stories about the industry. We're not even off the heels yet of what's happening with Puff Daddy or Diddy or Brother Love or whatever you want to call him. And we think about and we talk about this debauchery that he was involved in, or allegedly involved in, whether it be rape, whether it be domestic violence, whether it be prostitution, whether it be sex trafficking, whether it be drug abuse. And these were all things that we already knew. There was nothing new that Diddy has been accused of. And now we're acting as if this doesn't happen in hip hop, that hip hop itself doesn't celebrate, doesn't bathe in the filthiness, the brokenness, the evil, wasn't born in it. And we have that tension because we still want to create something beautiful out of hip hop, but we don't have the clarity to understand what it was in the beginning. We don't have the clarity to understand what we want it to be in the future. We don't have the clarity to understand the obstacles that stand between what it is and what we desire it to be. So we've reached a predictable and inevitable failure because we understand that there's a tension, because there's none good but God. And the other mistake that we've made is that we have blinders on. We have blinded ourselves. And one of the ways that you have to have clarity, if you're ever going to recover from failure, if you're ever going to push the edges of who you are, as you try to push toward who you want to be, and that's what we tried to do or wanted to do culturally, as parts of a hip hop culture, as we watch Drake and we watch Kendrick Lamar and we see what's happening with Diddy, we see what's happening all throughout hip hop culture, all of the secrets, the things that are coming out, the ugliness, the nastiness, the rottenness that's at the heart of it. And we want so much to create something beautiful out of it, but we have blinders on because we don't understand what it is or what it was from the beginning. We don't know our enemies. The Bible says this. It says that God gives grace to the humble, but he opposes the proud. And that scripture has always stood out to me. It stood out to me because when I read it or recite it or think about it or talk about it, what I think about is the fact that if I anchor myself in pride, if I'm proud, the Bible says that God begins to oppose me. In other words, if I humble myself, God is my ally. He's my father. He's my keeper. He's my provider. Jesus said that if you abide in me and my word abides in you, you can ask me for anything and I'll do it. He becomes my ally. But it says this. It says, humble yourself before the Lord and he will lift you up. Or God gives grace to the humble, but he opposes the proud. Watch this. Whenever we're prideful, we become God's enemy. The divine creator, the divine ruler of the universe who created you to love you, now becomes your adversary. Now think about hip hop, these blinders that we have on. And we're desiring all of the things that are in hip hop. I mean, we desire the fornication. That's what the Bible calls it, fornication. I know we got all kinds of names, hooking up, sleeping around, promiscuity. All of the Bible calls it fornication. So let's call it what God calls it, so that we can kind of take the blinders off and get smarter as this hip hop era ends and we move into the next epoch or whatever you want to call it, of whatever this spirit is now going to be as we move forward into AI. We desired the fornication. We desired the adultery. We didn't care. Like, that was part of what we wanted to do. That's why we listened to the music, because the music inspired that spirit in us to do those things that we called fun that were actually destructive. And now we had that tension because hip hop has a pride in it. That's where the whole Kendrick Lamar and Drake beef is anchored and rooted, is in pride. So when we think about hip hop and we talk about hip hop, we have to take the blinders off and understand that the enemies are right there, that we are our own worst enemies. And that now that the era is ending, we have an opportunity to move over into something else or to abandon it completely, that spirit that's destroying us. Listen to Kendrick Lamar and Drake talk. The two biggest current icons of the art form, the culture, the whatever you want to call it, the two biggest representatives, listen to the language. Listen to the hurt, the pain, the harm that's there, that is now the icon of this moment, this book ending of the time period. And at some point, we have to take the blinders off and understand that the enemy is an unseen. And that what we're looking for, we won't find there. And I think it's super telling that Kendrick Lamar is himself a Christ follower. And that's one of the reasons that I've listened to Kendrick Lamar across time. I'm not listening to it every day, but across time that I paid attention to it, and I've found meaning in a lot of his words and in a lot of his language and in a lot of the wrestling that he does as a human being, trying to be Christ-like. Being where he's from, having participated in things that he's participated in, having the power to do so much, but wanting to be Christ-like, wanting to humble yourself, but at the same time being built by something that is rooted and anchored in pride and ungodliness. And I'm drawn to the way that he wrestles with it. And he hasn't given up on his Christ-likeness because, as I told my buddies, that's me. That's all of us. Paul writes this in Romans chapter 7 and chapter 8. Paul gets into this thing where he talks about, he says that when I want to do right, wrong is what I end up doing. When I'm trying not to do wrong, I always end up doing that wrong. He says this, and it blows me away every time I read it, every time I think about it, every time I talk about it. He says this, he says, I get to a point to where the sin has so much power in me that it's no longer me, that it has overtaken me. And when Kendrick raps in this, in one of the beef, he goes through it. He talks about it all the time about, his Christianity. He talks about this wrestling. And that's what Paul was talking about. But Paul said, the grace of God, the death, the sacrifice, the crucifixion, the burial, the resurrection of Christ sets me free. God tells Paul, he says, my grace is sufficient for you. But the blinders make us feel like we need what hip hop has to offer. And I'm not telling anybody, please be clear about this. I'm not telling anybody don't listen to hip hop music. I'm not telling anybody don't dance. What I'm saying is know your enemies. And if it's the dancing that's drawing you away from God, that's drawing you away from understanding, from having a clear purpose for your life, for which you can sow your life, your time, all of those things that you love in and bear good fruit. If the dancing is taking you away from that, why do you need it? If the music is taking you away from that, why do you need it? If whatever it is, and that's not just hip hop, that's anything, if it's pulling you away from that, why do you need it? We have to take the blinders off. We have to know our enemies. Talking about hip hop, it's reaching the end of an era. This Kendrick Lamar and Drake beef have brought us to an end of an era, because now, if you're aware, you understand that AI is going to commoditize everything in such a way that hip hop will never be the same, similar to the way so many other things will never be the same. It will never be the same. So we have to take the blinders off. We have to, You have to know your enemies. So next things, I'm not going to leave us on a bad note. I wouldn't do that. That's not my intent. My intent here is to make sure that you understand that failure fears us, that there is no failure, one, in God, two, that there's no failure that does not have a meaning, because God doesn't create things without meaning. So whatever failure you have, you don't have to fear failure. Failure fears us because failure is looking at us like, whew, if they ever wake up and recognize what he's put in them, then I won't be able to survive here. So the beauty of things is failure fears you more than you fear failure. Let me stay on topic. So next things, fix your eyes. One of my favorite scriptures, I think it's 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 16 through 18. I always get mixed up, but it's either 2 Corinthians chapter 4 or it's 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 16 through 18. It says, therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary afflictions are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. And he says this, Paul says this, so we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since we know that what is seen is temporary. Remember I said this era is ending, this hip hop era is ending? What is seen is temporary, but what is unseen, spirits, the spirit that we call hip hop, that's been called a number of things over time. But what is unseen is eternal. So what are your eyes fixed on? Beloved, family, co-workers, ladies, gentlemen, friends, what are your eyes fixed on? As we round out this time of Kendrick Lamar and Drake going head to head, and personally, I think Kendrick Lamar, basically disintegrated whatever value Drake had, at least to said hip hop culture. But let's be clear. This was ugly. This was filthy. This was rotten. It was disgusting. It was we were bopping to pedophilia. We were bopping to domestic violence, to profanity, to threats of violence, to misogyny. But watch. Isn't that what we've always done for hip hop? Isn't that what we've always jammed to, bopped to, rode to, fought to, played basketball to, listened to while we were cleaning up? Isn't that the same filthiness, rottenness? And I was making excuses just like anybody else, so I'm not condemning anybody. I mean, I turned my music down when I pulled up in the driveway, just like most other people that had parents that were not having that. I listened to something different when I was at my friend's house versus when I was at my house, like everybody else. Like I don't, again, I'm not condemning anybody. But we have to not allow this failure, this failed era of hip hop. And I don't want to get too far off topic, but I consider it a failed era. I think there were some people who got very wealthy off of it, but I think the vast majority of people who were connected to hip hop, who tried to get some value out of hip hop, I think the vast majority of people, I think hip hop was a net negative, specifically for the Black community, but for humanity, I don't think that. I think it was a net negative. I'm getting off topic. Maybe I'll do another video, or somebody can send me something, and I'll pop up on somebody's podcast and have that debate. But we have to fix our eyes on what is unseen, those things that are not being said, those things that are not being shown to us, and that is this. And I'm going all the way back to the beginning to close this out. Everything that we were looking for in hip hop, God had already offered us through Christ. And now that we've reached that point to where we can see the failure, to where we're moving over into an AI space where hip hop is going to be more commoditized than it's ever been. You're not going to have any real talent. And I'm not saying that in any, just facetious kind of way to where, oh yeah, no, some people just don't have talent, and Drake got rich and no, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that, to down anybody, Drake, anybody else. I'm saying that literally you will not have to be good at anything other than typing to be able to create something that somebody can then sell for revenue. And you may think that that's going to be good, but if they can do that, it's just like at the cash register at the grocery store. Now you don't have to have people working that because the AI is doing it. It's going to be the same thing with your hip hop. The art, everything, every piece of art that you see in this slide deck was generated from Midjourney. So you're not going to need graffiti artists to do wonderful graffiti. You're not going to need MCs to do rhymes. And of course, there will be pockets of authentic, whatever you want to call it, still around, but it's going to change. So we have to fix out, what did we want from hip hop? We wanted love. We wanted love. That's what we wanted. We wanted love. When hip hop started, what the kids wanted who started it was love. They wanted to have love. They wanted to show love. Which, interestingly enough, the scripture says that people were asking Jesus, and Pharisees wanted to trap him, and they said this. They said, Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? And he said, the first, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul. And he said, the second one is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And he said, all the other laws, there's over 600 laws in the Jewish law, hang on these two. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's what we wanted from hip hop. So we never got. We got a bunch of other stuff. But now it's starting to crumble in a way that it hadn't in the past. So the next things are fix your eyes. Fix your eyes on Christ. Fix your eyes on goodness. Fix your eyes on God. Take your eyes off of all of this stuff that's not going to benefit you. That's not going to move you closer to your desired outcome. It's not going to anchor you and root you in the habits, in the thoughts, in the mindsets to get you where you want to go so that you can enjoy it. So that you can have God's peace, so that you can have God's joy, so that you can practice kindness with those who are around you, so that you can have real, honest, authentic, true love for one another and not have it be made impure by the spirit that's not going anywhere, even though the era is going to end, because that spirit has been here almost since forever and is going to be here almost forever. So just remember, when you fail, keep your clarity, fix your eyes, know your enemies. Remember there's none good but God. We're going to get there. Remember, failure fears us. If you got any, please take care of yourselves. If you got any, take care. When you're done taking care of yourself, take care of somebody else. My name is Chad Kifalme. Peace.